They say our minds are wired to trust the familiar, to feel safe around faces we know, voices we've heard 1,000 times. But what happens when the familiar becomes the mask for something else? Something hollow, watching, mimicking. College life moves in predictable rhythms, and mine had found its steady beat in Sunday afternoons spent with Alex. His apartment on the 3rd floor of a weathered 6-story building had become our sanctuary from the chaos of studies and social pressures. We'd sit for hours, talking about everything and nothing, letting the afternoon sun filter through his windows as the world outside continued its relentless march. The building itself told stories in its cracked walls and unfinished corners. Construction had stopped abruptly years ago, leaving it suspended between completion and abandonment. Half the apartments remained empty shells, their doorways gaping like mouths frozen mid-scream. The developer had vanished, along with the workers' final paychecks, leaving behind only whispers and a structure that seemed to breathe with its own malevolent life. Everyone in the neighborhood knew the stories. A young woman had climbed to the roof one evening, her heart heavy with burdens no one would ever fully understand. They found her body the next morning, broken on the concrete below. Since then, the roof had become forbidden territory after dark. Those who dared to venture up returned with tales that made your blood run cold. Voices calling from empty air, shadows moving against the light, and a presence that watched from the darkness above. The building's curse had deeper roots than just one tragic death. During construction, workers had reported incidents that defied explanation. Tools disappeared and reappeared in impossible places. Men claimed to hear their names called from empty floors above. 3 laborers had died in accidents that seemed almost deliberate, as if invisible hands had guided their falls. After the 3rd death, the remaining workers abandoned the site, leaving their tools where they lay and never looking back. Alex and I had grown comfortable with the building's reputation. In daylight, surrounded by the familiar clutter of his apartment, the stories felt distant and harmless. We'd joke about the ghost on the roof, treating it like a neighborhood legend that added character to an otherwise ordinary place. One Sunday afternoon, restlessness crept into our usual routine. The hours stretched ahead of us like an empty canvas, and I found myself curious about the forbidden upper floors. Almost casually, I suggested we explore the roof. The words slipped out before I could consider their weight. Alex's reaction was immediate and intense. His face went pale, and he shook his head with the desperation of someone trying to ward off a curse. He refused absolutely, insisting he would never go up there, not for any reason. When I pressed him, trying to dismiss the stories as mere superstition, his refusal only grew stronger. There was something in his eyes that made me drop the subject entirely, a fear so deep it seemed to come from somewhere beyond rational thought. Days passed, and our conversation returned to safer topics. Then, unexpectedly, Alex called with an invitation to go out somewhere. He asked me to meet him at his building by 5 in the evening, and I agreed without hesitation. I arrived exactly on time, as was my habit. The building's entrance felt different in the early evening light, shadows stretching longer and darker than I remembered. When I asked the caretaker about Alex, the old man looked confused and told me that Alex hadn't returned home yet. Still, I decided to wait upstairs, thinking perhaps the caretaker had simply missed him. As I climbed the familiar stairs to the third floor, my footsteps echoed strangely in the empty stairwell. The sound seemed to bounce off the walls in ways that didn't quite make sense, as if the building itself was listening. I reached Alex's door and was about to knock when it opened from within. Alex stood before me, but something felt wrong. His appearance was exactly as I remembered, yet there was an emptiness to his presence that I couldn't quite identify. His eyes seemed focused on something beyond the visible world, and when I mentioned my surprise at finding him home, he simply nodded and gestured for me to enter. We sat in his living room as we had countless times before, but the atmosphere felt heavy and charged. Alex remained unusually quiet, his head bowed, as if he was listening to a conversation only he could hear. The silence stretched between us like a taut wire, ready to snap at any moment. Then, without warning, he raised his head and spoke words that sent ice through my veins. He suggested we go to the roof, his voice carrying an odd, hollow quality that didn't quite sound like him. I stared at him in disbelief, reminding him of his previous terror at the very suggestion. My words seemed to drift past him without impact, as if he existed in a different reality where our earlier conversation had never occurred. He dismissed my concerns with a wave of his hand, claiming he had only been joking before. His insistence grew stronger, more urgent, as if something was compelling him to reach that forbidden sixth floor. Against every instinct screaming in my head, I found myself following him up the stairs. Each step felt heavier than the last, as if the building itself was trying to pull us down. The walls seemed to close in around us, and the air grew thick with an oppressive weight that made breathing difficult. We had just passed the fourth floor when my phone erupted into its cheerful ringtone. The sound jarred against the building's ominous silence like a scream in a cathedral. I glanced at the screen and felt the world tilt beneath my feet. Alex's name glowed on the display, his familiar contact photo smiling back at me with warmth that contrasted sharply with the cold dread now filling my chest. The person beside me continued climbing, seemingly unaware of the impossibility unfolding. When I asked about his phone, he responded that it was in his pocket, his voice maintaining that same hollow quality that had been bothering me since I'd arrived. Panic rose in my throat like bile. I invented an excuse about my mother calling, claiming I needed privacy for a personal conversation. The figure beside me insisted I could take the call after we reached the roof, but I was already moving, my feet carrying me down the stairs with desperate urgency. I burst into the caretaker's small office, my hands shaking as I answered the phone. Alex's voice, warm and familiar and completely real, filled my ear with confused concern. He told me he was standing outside the building, waiting for me, as planned, completely unaware of the impossible situation unfolding above. When I found him on the street, Alex's confusion mirrored my own terror. His face was exactly as I remembered, but now it carried the life and warmth that had been missing from the figure I'd left on the stairs. We stood together in the fading daylight, trying to make sense of what had happened. The questions multiplied, like shadows at sunset. If Alex was here with me, Then who had been leading me toward the roof? What force had worn his face and spoken with his voice? And most terrifying of all, what had been waiting for us on the 6th floor? We gathered 5 other people from the building, their faces grave with the weight of our story. Together, we searched every room, every corner, every possible hiding place, up to the 5th floor. We found nothing. No trace of the figure that had worn Alex's identity like a mask. The building seemed to mock our efforts with its silence, keeping its secrets locked away in the darkness above. None of us had the courage to climb that final flight of stairs to the 6th floor. Some boundaries are meant to remain uncrossed. Some doors meant to stay closed. As we stood there in the stairwell, looking up at the darkness above, I understood that the building had been trying to claim something from us, and it had nearly succeeded. Some stories are meant to remain unfinished, their endings lost in the darkness between floors, in the space between what is and what should never be.